Hey, and welcome to Reporting In. I'm your host, Malcolm Fleschner. This is the TYT Network show dedicated to journalism, investigative journalism. We talk to reporters, whether some who work for TYT, others who are outside of the TYT fold, find out what they're doing, what stories they're working on. We find out the story behind the story often, or at least we try to. And today on the show, I'm actually super excited because we're talking to Walker Bragman. And if you're not familiar with Walker, I will give you a bio of him after I bring him in. Walker, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm so excited to talk to you all. So for those of you who do not, unlike me, follow Walker on Twitter, I recommend that you do. But if you don't, he's a freelance journalist and cartoonist, which I thought was interesting. We may talk about that later. Based out of New York. So you're in New York today? Is that true?
I'm in New York today.
In the city proper, I assume, somewhere?
In the city proper, in my closet-sized apartment.
Okay. So your work has appeared in Paste Magazine, Salon, The Hill, TATM, and I'm sure any number of other outlets. Any others that I should mention?
HuffPost, The Intercept.
HuffPost and The Intercept. Well, I mean, okay, lesser. They're not as good, but okay. So that's great. And Walker, the reason I wanted to talk to you specifically today, I mean, I've been following your work for a while, but specifically I wanted to talk to you about Yemen. But before we get into that and some of the work that you've been doing reporting around Yemen, I wanted to find out a little bit about you and get your background, because I'm always fascinated on this show to find out why on earth anybody would ever want to become a journalist. I know it seems like I'm hosting a show that's just about journalism that should be second nature, but I still find it very curious. So what's your background? How did you come into this profession in the first place?
So my whole life I've always been two things, kind of a creative type and a huge pain in the ass. And I think from like a very early age, I realized that I had to do something professionally that allowed me to utilize both of those gifts, I guess. So at first I wanted to be a political cartoonist. I did a lot of that during the 2012 election cycle down in Charleston while volunteering for Occupy. And then I got into blogging kind of through HuffPost, and I thought I was super edgy, and I wanted to be a commentator and challenge norms. But really it was kind of immaturity and bad writing. But then 2016 happened, and I got my first opportunity to do actual reporting through Paste Magazine. They sent me to the Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And through that, I kind of have slowly began to realize that there's a real need for original reporting and journalism today. And we're flooded with commentary, and there are, thousands of people who do commentary better than I do. And so I decided to focus more on journalism. And lately, I've been trying to do more human stories, focus on people, and use their stories to explain national problems and now international problems.
All right, so well, that's interesting, because I mean, TYT is a commentary outlet, and we like to think we're among better ones. But as you point out, it not only are a lot of people doing commentary, but it's also a lot cheaper than actual journalism. Being out in the field, sifting through Freedom of Information Act requests and sifting through documents and all that sort of stuff. So do you find that you have an affinity for that side of it too, or is it more about being out there interviewing people and talking to human beings? Because they're both are important.
So I'm an okay researcher. I do a fair bit of research in law school. I also do law school on the side. I know that that's not normally something that people do on the side.
Everyone, you got to have hobbies. It keeps you sane.
Yeah. So I'm a fair researcher, but I really do, I think, prefer the human side of it, the interacting with people and getting to know somebody and learn their story. That to me makes everything worthwhile. I mean, right now it's a depressing time. It's a difficult time for many people. But if you can relate to somebody and if you can make a minor improvement in their life, then that's the whole ballgame.
Well, I like the idea that you can self-identify as a pain in the ass and find a profession that that you can channel that into in a way that is, well, not super remunerative necessarily, but at least you can keep your head above water and you can tell stories if that's what you want to do. The story I wanted to talk to you specifically today, and we may get to other things, but the focus I want to talk to you about is Yemen, because like a lot of people, I get all of my news from MSNBC.
Oh, of course. And
until last week, I didn't know there was such a place as Yemen. It turns out there is. I saw a report on MSNBC. Chris Hayes dedicated and it was even more than 2, but it's 2 full minutes to the crisis in Yemen. And it was like 2 minutes and 4 seconds or something. And I was like, wow, this must be a really, really important story for them to have ignored it for the last year and now to give it 2 minutes and then move on. But so you're telling me, though, that you were aware of Yemen being a story prior to last week, even though MSNBC had not covered it. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. But I will, acknowledge that this story has kind of gone under the radar for years, and it's not something that really had my focus for a long time. And I think I'm certainly not the only one in this boat. Like a lot of people, I did not prioritize that story in the way that I have prioritized domestic ones. And the article came out in Fair that said MSNBC has done 455 segments on Stormy Daniels in the last year, but 0 on Yemen. So I went and I looked on Twitter, just hashtag Yemen, to see what was going on. And I found a video from a Saudi coalition, US-Saudi UAE coalition airstrike from my birthday, August 4th, 2017. And the video is horrific. It's people digging corpses out of rubble, and a lot of those corpses are children. And at that point, I went a little manic, and I didn't really sleep very well for a few days, and that to me was it. That was the moment when I realized that we have to do more on this.
All right, so let's before we get to, I want to get to that and talk about it more, but let's back up a little bit and talk about what the Yemen, it's described as a civil war. So can you give me a little bit of background for the viewers who aren't as familiar, who like me have been watching MSNBC and are totally unaware this is a story? Who is fighting and why, and how long has it been going on?
So back in 2015, a Shia sect, Houthi rebels, overthrew the internationally recognized Hadi government. And in response, a number of Sunni countries, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, got together and decided that this was unacceptable. And they got the U.S. involved. They turned to the U.S. and said we needed assistance, and the U.S. gladly provided it. And the official narrative from the coalition is that Iran is backing the Houthi rebels. The rebels deny that. What the reality is, it almost doesn't matter at this point. What matters is that the Saudi-led coalition has been targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure for the last 3 years. They've been murdering children, and they've cut off Yemen from the rest of the world. So now there's famine, there's cholera. 22 million people are without food, water, or medical supplies. And as many as 10,000 have died, but that's a very conservative number from 2 years ago. It hasn't been updated since. Some estimates say as many as 50,000 have died. And the UN has called it the world's worst humanitarian crisis.
And Yemen was already the poorest country, essentially, in the Middle East before this all happened. And that probably contributed to why the Houthis were successful in overthrowing the government, because obviously the government was not handling its very basic responsibility. Obviously, things have now gotten much worse. And I believe the Saudi-led coalition has retaken the capital, correct? But there is still the rebels still hold a significant portion of the country, and that's what they're fighting over. But this isn't like some conflict in the Middle East between two countries that I guess this doesn't really happen anymore, but that used to happen. Like when the Iran-Iraq war at the time, back in the early 80s, were two countries that they were fighting each other, and it wasn't part of a larger geopolitical situation that, the Cold War or anything like that. But this is not like that. The United States is deeply involved in this conflict. And can you explain what the U.S. involvement is and how we are participating, and how we're not just complicit in that we're like looking the other way at what the Saudis and UAE is doing, but that we are intimately involved in it?
Well, we're providing them with bombs. We're providing them tactical support with finding targets. We're logistical support. We are in the control rooms. I mean, effectively, we are part of the coalition. It's not just that we're backing it. We are a part of it.
And that leads me. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, and I just wanted to add a quick note that the Houthi rebels gained a lot of power and influence really in the 2011 uprising against the internationally recognized government.
So you're talking, is that like Arab Spring related?
Yes, there was, yeah.
Okay.
Just more background. Yeah.
So, okay, so, and this leads to the question about MSNBC, and I bring it up because MSNBC, like much of the American media, or news media, doesn't provide a whole lot of international news. It's not what they do. Americans don't, well, they would argue that Americans don't care, but it just doesn't happen for the moment. But this is a story where the United States is involved. It's not like the United States is just a dispassionate observer of these events, and so it's American taxpayers who are paying for those bombs and for the military assistance that we're offering to Saudi Arabia. So it's justifiable that you would want to cover this on those terms. And yet, as Fair and then you followed up, pointed out, MSNBC did not cover for the full 12 months. Did not cover this war, which is as according to the UN, the greatest humanitarian disaster. Some would argue maybe what's going on in Myanmar is comparable, but there's no question that it's horrific. So why do you think MSNBC doesn't cover Yemen? Why is this not on their? I mean, they got a lot of shows and nothing every day for a whole year.
So it's not. So MSNBC's lack of coverage is pretty galling, but it's not just an MSNBC problem. I mean, for the last since the Vietnam era, we have had the sanitizing of news. Cronkite's condemnation of the Tet Offensive, I think, it's been very controversial, and media has kind of come to a nice little arrangement with government today, especially now that access is currency. They come to a nice little arrangement where you don't really show the casualties, you don't show the gore, you never show the gore, but you use graphic images very sparingly and never in a way that could portray U.S. operations abroad in a negative light. And it's a very problematic arrangement. It works very well in a news cycle where ratings and clicks and likes matter more than informing people, but it's not a sustainable model for a functioning democracy. If we truly believe that an informed public is necessary to keep the system going, we are failing at the most basic level, and MSNBC's lack of coverage is just the tip of the iceberg. It may be the most obvious and galling example, but it is certainly not the only problem.
Right. Well, for those who don't know, during the Vietnam War, during the Tet Offensive was in 1968, and it was a surprise to the American forces, and the North Vietnamese were able to take certain cities like Hue, not the capital, but other cities, and Walter Cronkite famously went on TV and said, "What the hell's going on? I thought we were winning this war." And but the whole narrative of the Vietnam War, there was a lot of this kind of imagery that came back to the United States. Some of the most famous images from the war are horrific, and ones that the lesson learned from the military was we have to co-opt the media and not just let them independently report on these things, and that's what we've seen ever since. So that's just a little background on what you're talking about. And then you're saying what MSNBC is just continuing this new trend not to cover the graphic side of the war, to go with official sources and pretend like official sources are reliable and trustworthy, but unofficial sources are not to be trusted. Of course, the official sources are what got us into the Iraq war, and the unofficial sources are the ones who are saying there are no weapons of mass destruction. Who knows who's right? I guess turns out that the official line is not always true. Maybe Donald Rumsfeld didn't find weapons of mass destruction north of Tikrit and south of Tikrit and east and west of Tikrit. So, and so you took action. You've taken action about this, focusing on MSNBC, and you created a hashtag and so on and so forth. So where did that idea come from? Was that you, or was that someone else? You were just hopping onto it. I first saw it in your Twitter feed.
It was me, but I couldn't have done it without a ton of very committed people with more energy than I have. But yeah, we started a hashtag, De-sanitize, which is de-sanitize is not a word, but it conveys the message.
So it was an Operation De-sanitize. It sounds like it was almost like a military thing. You're trying to de-sanitize. They've sanitized the war. You're trying to de-sanitize it, show the truth of it. But not only that, but like MSNBC wasn't even showing the non-graphic images. They just were pretending it wasn't happening.
Well, they're still not showing the graphic images.
Right.
I mean, nobody is. I mean, I have to give props to CNN, because they have shown of all the coverage I've seen, CNN has actually shown like the most graphic footage. They've cut off before you get to the parts that are really horrific. For example, they played a clip of a father finding his son's body in the back of a pickup truck in a heap of corpses, and they show his sorrow and his sadness and his wails, and that's powerful. It's a powerful image. But they cut off before he pulls his son's body up, sobbing, and then sets it back down, resigned to the new reality that his son has died or has been murdered. And I would argue, and I do argue, that seeing the full uncensored clip is necessary, especially because our tax money is going towards it. And for years, we've just hidden these atrocities behind words like collateral and civilian casualties. Matt Taibbi wrote a great article in Rolling Stone about the America's kill list and how we've sanitized the worst things that we do abroad. And it's true. And we have to strip that veil away, and we have to show the ugly brutality that we are not only complicit in, but committing.
We're funding it, and we could stop it if we insisted. If our government wanted to stop it, we could stop it. And that's our. If in a democracy, we have to be well informed enough to tell our government, the people representing us, what to do. That's not happening. There's a breakdown on every level, but this is the first step, is the information. And so I guess, Mike, I think you alluded to it before, but what I'd want to ask you is why you think MSNBC doesn't cover this. Why, or credit to the news organizations that do, like CNN to the extent that they have. I'm just one thing I'm going to back you up that a lot of I saw that footage that you're mentioning, and I've seen a lot of the footage, and it really is grisly and awful. And you do have to see it to recognize the enormity of this situation. And I think you're talking specifically about the school bus bombing.
Yes.
was in rebel-held territory in the middle of the city. These kids, 29 kids, I think, were killed. But this is a school bus, kids going off to some sort of camp.
40.
40 were killed.
40 between the ages of 6 and 11.
Yeah, and it's horrible, of course, and you need to see it. But a lot of the footage that I saw, they showed the hospital where kids, maybe a kid with a head has been wrapped, but you didn't see the bodies. You see, but it's not as horrific because you're seeing people like, yeah, that kid was injured, but he's going to recover. They're not showing you all the kids who aren't going to recover, and I think that's probably their tendency as well. But let's get back to this question about. So I mean, like MSNBC's charter doesn't say anything about informing a well-informed electorate or promoting democracy. They're they're part of Comcast, and their only job is to make money. So is covering a story like Yemen in MSNBC and Comcast's financial best interests?
Well, probably not. I mean, and this is what Chris Hayes said on July 24th. I believe it was July 24th in a Twitter interaction. He said that climate change segments have been, quote, a palpable ratings killer. So the incentives are not great.
Yeah.
And it was so candid and so he did follow up and say, you know, it hasn't stopped us. We still do those segments, and that's true, but not to the there's no prioritization of stories by newsworthiness or need to see. It's based on what will get us the most money, what will bring in the highest ratings, so we can get more advertisers, bring in more advertising dollars. More shares, more likes, and that fits in very well with this sort of fealty to official sourcing and government insiders. You know, where access becomes so necessary. It's a cycle, and it feeds. You have the access, so you can get the most salacious stories. So you can break the news, get more likes, get more traffic, bring in more advertising. I mean, it's horrible. It's corporate media. It's what it's all about. And there used to be a sense of responsibility to the public discourse, and we just don't have it anymore.
Right.
And we have to bring it back. And it's on smaller folks like TYT and me, and you know, with the extent that I have a platform, to use that to really shift conversations. News should be about national starting conversations. And
that, I guess that's my question is, where do you feel, obviously you feel like shaming plays a role in compelling news organizations to do the basics of their job in informing the public about what's going on in their name and around the world and so on and so forth. And we're almost out of time. But I just want, like, is that really a sustainable model? Like, I mean, I appreciate it. And I think it's a valuable thing, a service you're performing, and a lot more people now know about what's going on in Yemen because of this hashtag and the pressure on MSNBC to cover it. But is that really a sustainable model for getting them, you know, in line?
No, we need new media. We need new media outlets, new media sources to rise up and kind of do. I mean, in a way, it's kind of like the progressive movement in politics. You know, the system is the way it is. There's so much money flooding the system, so you need to have people willing to say, we're not going to take the money. Unfortunately, it's harder to do when you're a company and say, we're not going to take, you know, these advertising dollars. We're going to be funded on whatever. And but that's kind of what has to happen. We need journalists to be journalists and care more about the story than popularity. And
right.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, but I think, but the shaming. The answer I was looking for from you, no. But my answer to it is that the shaming, it's not. Yes, it might get them to cover Yemen this one time once, but the larger picture is it will put out the message that MSNBC and the mainstream media aren't doing their job, and to get the larger public to increasingly question whether they should be being informed by a news organization that is profit driven. And the more people who start questioning that, the better off we all are, and the more likely people are to pursue alternative sources of information and independent media that doesn't have this corporate advertiser driven access bias. Anyway, all right, we're almost.
You've already got it.
Yeah. What they really need to do is watch more reporting in. But we're almost out of time. But quickly before we go, what are you working on now that people can look forward to seeing in the future? Stories that you. I mean, I already said that they should. Well, we got your. We'll share your Chiron and we'll put it in or share your Twitter feed in the Chiron and get direct people to where they can find out more about what you're doing. But if you can tease anything that you've got coming up for us, that would be great. But if not, that's okay too.
Well, I have a draft of a piece kind of making this same pitch, which I'm shopping around, and I've also got a story on homelessness that I've been working on since March.
Well, so, I mean, that's like you're trying to pick one story that is more important or just as important, but getting even less coverage than Yemen. Homelessness is a good one. That's right up there. You're really you're picking all the you're picking all the story. What did Chris Hayes say about the climate change stories? They're the incentive. You're picking all the poor incentive stories. You're gonna like tick all those boxes. Very nice. Well done, Walker Bragman. All right, well, I'm gonna let you go. Thank you so much for talking to us today. I hope people follow up and pursue the stories you're working on, not only about Yemen but other stories, because I think they're really interesting, and I appreciate the work that you're doing and shining light in places that not only are dark but that many in the media would just as soon remain dark. So I think you're doing a great job with that, and I appreciate it. And to you guys at home, thank you for watching and reporting in. I appreciate your viewership. This is it's a show that members get before anybody else. So I hope you appreciate the work we're doing here. I appreciate the crew and all the staff here who help put the show together. And I hope you'll watch future episodes as well. Thanks a lot. This is Reporting In with Malcolm Fleschner.